Hi everyone, before we begin today's episode, I want to share a quick note. Unfortunately, my internet connection during the recording wasn't stable. So instead of video, you will see my photo throughout the conversation. The good news is that Karl Joseph Weaver, a fantastic expert and outstanding public speaker, delivered his insights crystal clear. And that's what really matters. And I'm excited for you to hear from him. Thank you so much for understanding. And now let's dive into this fascinating conversation with Karl. Enjoy. Welcome to Chips Weekly, where we explore the world of semiconductors, supply chains, and the technologies shaping our future. I'm your host Diana, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Karl Joseph Weaver, known in the industry as a smartphone Rainmaker. Welcome, Karl.
Diana, thank you very much for welcoming me.
So I would like to start with the introduction of yourself. Karl, you've been called the smartphone Rainmaker. Could you please share what this title means and how was it earned?
I earned the title from 2008 until 2013 when I was dispatched by a company called Gemalto, later to be acquired by Thales. And my mission was to go into China and handle the smartphone manufacturers to bring what we call contactless mobile near-field communications for their SWP NFC USIM card. So they had a unique USIM card. Gemalto is the world leader in SIM card manufacture, and they invited me to Beijing, China to promote the first type of mobile payment on a smartphone. So that's what I did, and I managed to sell or promote this technology to mainland Chinese smartphone OEMs, Taiwan smartphone OEMs, and South Korea smartphone OEMs. And I pitched it to various mobile network operators all throughout Southeast Asia, from Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Korea, and of course, China. So quite honestly, that's why they called me the Asian mobile industry Rainmaker, because I'm bilingual in Mandarin. And let me just kind of go back to the start, how I started my professional career. I started by receiving a scholarship to learn Mandarin Chinese by the Taiwanese Ministry of Education. And I studied Mandarin under scholarship for 3 years in Taipei, Taiwan. And then I jumped into the fledgling microcomputer manufacturing industry. Now, I rode that up until late 1992. And after 10 years in Taiwan, combined language training and working experience, I returned to the United States. I'm originally from the Boston suburbs, Quincy, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. And I decided I needed to be closer to Asia because I knew I'd be jump shooting Asia for my entire professional career. So I settled on the closest port in the continental United States to do that, which is the Seattle area. I was choosing between Seattle and Portland. I think I made the right choice. And I jumped into a well-known land mobile and radio communications manufacturer called Zetron in Redmond, Washington State. And I worked in that company until about the turn of the century, from 1993 until the turn of the century. And then I reinvented myself again as a smartphone public speaker on Microsoft's campus in 2003, and then London in 2004, and then 4 years after that, as I worked for companies, I realized to harness the power of social media in the West and in the East to deliver cutting-edge public speaking presentations, to get technology designed. The goal was to get technology designed into the supply chain, which is mostly Asia. It's Asia. That's where the supply chain is. So I rode that up until around 2008 when I was asked to go to work in China for Gemalto to bring mobile payments and mobile security. Now, I left in 2013 and I continue to do the same, bringing mobile payments and mobile security, and also many other technologies like eSIM, iSIM, dual roots of trust security, blockchain, and IoT, Internet of Things for IoT modules, and also renewable energy. And in 2021, I was dispatched by a Shanghai company to work in China in 2020, but due to COVID, I couldn't go. So I had to learn the technology for our SDK middleware technology. I had to learn the technology remotely. So I learned it remotely, and in 2021, we decided to put an office in Singapore. I helped to head that office as head of community, biz dev, and partnerships. And I worked 2 full years bringing a green energy network into Singapore. I returned in 2024, and I returned to all this hype about AI this, AI that. And I decided to do a tremendous amount of research and some online training. And I jumped into AI in 2024. I'd had a little bit of knowledge of AI prior, but I jumped into it and I used Newport Technologies. Newport Technologies is my public speaking moniker that I started in 1999 because I have a niche career as a bilingual Mandarin speaking American citizen. The actual mission of the company is to evangelize cutting edge mobile technologies, and IoT is, AI is also a mobile technology. The whole mission of the company is to bring awareness and to get these technologies designed in to the Asia-Pacific supply chain for the ICT sector. That is the mission of Newport Technologies. And the second mission is to just be my moniker for my public speaking thought leadership, which is what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years. And I'm telling you, it's very, very effective when you are a public speaker, and then when you have the bilingual language skills. And then my job is business development, opening up and getting technology design into the supply chain. So Newport Technologies is what I use. And I continue to use it today.
Could you please also share some success stories or case studies you're most proud from your career?
Yes, so I can say without trying to boast, I was Newport Technologies. I started in 2000. Started to use it effectively in 2003, where I became the first public speaker in the world on smartphones, first in Washington State on Microsoft's campus, to evangelize the technology. And then I learned how to use YouTube and then LinkedIn to first capture the video that I was presenting, and then add it to YouTube and then stream it as a hyperlink onto LinkedIn. This is a fantastic Harvard Business Review type of use case for every company. But I started this 20 years ago, and the reasons I started it is because I'm a Mandarin speaker, and people were saying, I don't believe you can speak Chinese. And so I started it, but then I realized it's an incredibly powerful tool. Now, from smartphones, I migrated to mobile payments and mobile security, eSIM, iSIM, and all these other ICT sector technologies. Really, I'm a specialist in the smart card and semiconductor sector of the wireless industry. And AI is a wireless technology because it's at the edge. And also, whenever you're streaming data from any IoT device up to the cloud, you're using wireless technologies.
Thank you, Karl. So now I would like to move to the AI supply chain and geopolitics. In your recent presentation, you described Asia-Pacific as a backbone of the AI supply chain. What makes this region so dominant?
Because the West has outsourced all of its technology, mostly to China, but not just China. Taiwan, honestly, is the hidden gem for the entire ICT sector because, as you know, TSMC is a Taiwanese company. And as I'm not sure if our viewers know this, but TSMC, it's not the only semiconductor company in Taiwan, but it is the largest, and they control 90% of all these AI chip supply chain in the world. And that includes the GPUs because, NVIDIA is the largest vendor for GPUs, but NVIDIA is actually it's a fabless company that depends on a lot of Taiwanese contract manufacturers. In fact, Jensen Huang is born in Taiwan, and his relative is Lisa Su of AMD. So in a nutshell, it really is Taiwan that brought the growth of semiconductor technologies not only to America with TSMC's new fab in North America, but to South Korea and to Japan and to Japan now as well, but also to China. What people don't realize is at the turn of the century, Taiwan had pretty much a cornerstone of the entire supply chain for manufacturing. And it's a very complex ecosystem. The semiconductor chip manufacturing ecosystem, I'm sorry to say this for some of those people listening in some of those countries, there are only a handful of countries that are ever going to be able to manufacture semiconductor chips. The supply chain requirements, all the source of at least 1,000 different suppliers of solutions from soft hardware to chemicals to water to power. There are very few countries in the world that can actually make semiconductor chips. The biggest companies in the world are trying to make them. I detail that in some slides, which we can show later on. But it's a very complex ecosystem, and Taiwan pretty much owns that. They not only own that from the semiconductor chip supply chain, they also own that from the data center server technology side, because 90% of what we call Taiwan ODMs, or original design manufacturers, which came online in the early 2000s also, they control 90% of the cloud/data center server technologies that go into these data centers, which are basically farms of data centers, of these data centers all over the world. So America is actually leading in that. Nobody's even close to America, 5,000. China has about 450. But the actual data center design comes from 90% comes from Taiwan, or what we mean by ODMs as original design manufacturers. So those design manufacturers farm out the actual manufacture to contract manufacturers who are either Taiwanese or also mainland Chinese. But there are mainland Chinese cloud data center server vendors as well. Inspur is one mainland Chinese company, but you've got Pegatron, you've got Gigabyte. All of these are Taiwanese companies that do ODMs. And then, of course, Foxconn is the famous contract manufacturer in Taiwan. So there's a complex supply chain, but it really does migrate back to this little powerhouse, let's call it a country, this little powerhouse called Taiwan, which is the Silicon Shield, because it is the most important country in the world for ICT sector technology. There is no country more important. It's even more important than the United States.
So what are the biggest risks the world faces in supply chain? You were just saying Taiwan, and we know the situation, and how the companies can build the resilience.
So let's debunk YouTube and let's debunk social media, because there's so much hype and hysteria. And that's why I decided, when I did my public speaking, I made a rule: no hype, no hysteria, and no geopolitical overtones. I'm perfectly the right person to be the evangelist for the AI chip supply chain. Why? I studied my Mandarin in Taiwan. I spent 10 years in Taiwan, but then I went to China and brought mobile payments and mobile security to Chinese smartphone manufacturers. I'm an American. I was in the WTO in 1999 representing the Hong Kong government so that the charter for the WTO through Hong Kong could be relinquished back to the WTO so China, then Taiwan, could join. So in terms of all of Greater China, I have contributed an incredible amount to fostering the growth between the East and the West. And I continue to do that today in 2 different languages. But there are geopolitical issues. For those who think that Taiwanese and Chinese people don't get along, that's not true. They do get along. I see them working harmoniously in many, many different companies all over Asia, all over the United States, and all over China. So for those people who think, well, there's going to be a war, I don't want to get into whether there is or isn't. I think that would be tremendously, terribly, let's say, destructive for the entire world. And, Chinese people like to do business. And so let's debunk all of this stuff with China's going to invade Taiwan tomorrow. Let's just stop all of that.
So let's look globally, not just in Taiwan. What are the supply chain risks and how we can address them timely?
If you were Taiwan, you would call this the biggest poker game that a small independent place can play. I don't know why people are so concerned about Taiwan. It's the world leader in semiconductor chips. Nobody comes close, and nobody will, because now in Taiwan and in Phoenix, Arizona, which I predicted, by the way, 8 years ago, I'll tell you a short story about that. Taiwan is now to the point of where their first, let's say, yield of 2-nanometer chips. They've got a yield of 2-nanometer chips in Taiwan, but I heard that they've also got the first yield of 2-nanometer chips in Phoenix, Arizona, and TSMC is working on 1.5 right now. Their Intel, good luck. I don't believe in hyper-hysteria. I believe in telling the truth, and I'm one of the people who's in the middle of all of this. And by the way, I'm going to Taiwan in about 10 days with my family, One of the reasons is to attend Semicon Taiwan in Taipei from the 10th to the 12th, and I will also attend the October Semicon West in Phoenix. So I'm in the middle of all this. I need to be where the Rainmaker needs to be. But getting back to Taiwan, mainland Chinese people know that it really is Taiwan that helped mainland Chinese to grow their entire ecosystem. I mean, Foxconn has hundreds of thousands of employees in China. And now the supply chain issue is a little bit interesting. In 2015, I gave a presentation at Seattle University talking about how I saw, due to techno-nationalism and protectionism, Western companies are not going to put up with that for much longer, because what Western company wants to be blackmailed when they're trying to offshore production? I mean, they were offshoring production because of one reason: cost. But China's not cheap anymore. And Southeast Asia is also, certain countries are cheap. Not every country is cheap. And it's only getting more and more expensive to live and work in Asia. And the reason is because 30, 40 plus years ago, the water, the land, the labor was cheap. Guess what? Not anymore. India, one exception, but India...
So India might be the next semiconductor big hub, right?
Well, no. I am the one who made that mistake in 2015 at Seattle University, where I taught globalization for a year. But before I went to China, I taught globalization. When I came back, I gave a presentation about how to sell to the Chinese world. But no, in 2015, I was invited to talk about the globalizations of mobile technologies. And I predicted that American and Western companies would outsource, would decouple from China because of techno-nationalism and protectionism. I made the right prediction. I said India would be a logical place, as well as Vietnam. It's really all of Southeast Asia, and it really is Chinese money that's driving this Chinese diaspora from Singapore to Taiwan to China to other parts. It's Chinese diaspora that live all over Southeast Asia. The Chinese population is all over Southeast Asia. They may have a different passport, but they're indigenous Han Chinese, most of them. So the interesting thing is, I thought that India would be, but India cannot ramp up fast enough for their key supplier, which is Apple. They can't ramp up fast enough.
Yes, however, from the news last week, the Modi puts the target made in India cheap by 2025.
I have a lot of experience in India, also 30 plus years of experience from the top to the bottom to India. I'm not just a China and Asia, I'm an entire Asia specialist. Here's the biggest issue with India: it's tariffs, and it's also import taxes. And that really has to do with the legacy British system. That has to do with the legacy British system. Now, Vietnam has been able to avoid that. I'm just going to divert for 1 second. Why has Vietnam been able to divert that? Because Vietnam has what we call a China plus one strategy, which is all the Chinese manufacturers in Taiwan, China, even Singapore, have brought manufacturing and all kinds of expertise into Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi and various provinces to manufacture and then immediately re-export. And the Vietnamese government says, no tax, no problem, bring it in, make it. Well, the Vietnamese realized, let's really understand what globalization is all about. Where did Taiwan get the technology? Where did Japan get the technology? Well, mostly from the United States. But then where did South Korea get the technology? From Taiwan. And where did China get the technology? From Taiwan. Where is India getting the technology? India is getting the technology from, I think India is getting it from a combination of Western, maybe Taiwan, America, and probably even China as well. So you see, this is all a globalization process. Now, Vietnam was very, very smart. They wanted to be non-aligned, like India. They wanted to remain non-aligned, but they wanted to invite Chinese manufacturers. But the sole goal, the sole purpose is to learn how to assemble, bring in more brain power, and then they can replace China to be an actual manufacturer with the help of semiconductor manufacturing, because semiconductor chips are the basic building blocks of all ICT sector technologies. And that's why you see VinFast, which is an EV manufacturer. They even have a warehouse in the United States. Vietnam has figured out, I learned from China. So now getting back to the geopolitical issues, in my humble opinion, no one is going to stop the globalization of mobile technologies. No one is going to stop that. China can't stop it from going to India. India can't stop it from reshoring to the United States. It is going to reshore to the United States because I've done a tremendous amount of research in this, but Apple is not a stupid company. They work with Foxconn. They are working with Foxconn right now to bring all of the component supply chain back to the United States, which means they're still manufacturing 80% in China. They're still manufacturing 20% in India, and then various peripherals they're manufacturing in Vietnam. That will stay. But the Trump administration is pushing. What are the three most expensive components on an iPhone? Number one, the mobile apps processor chip. I'm going to say this in Chinese. 你的移动应用处理器芯片, your mobile apps processor chip is the most expensive. Well, guess what? Apple will work with TSMC in Arizona. What is the second most expensive component? The screen. Corning is the largest screen for iPhone and for ICT sector mobile devices and all kinds of devices that use touch capability, touch sensor capability. Corning is the largest manufacturer. Apple has announced that they're reshoring all of their screen manufacture to the United States. That was a major announcement in the White House where Tim Cook gave this funky gold, looked like a gold biscuit to Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump is going, I'm a multi-billionaire. You gave me like a little piece of plastic. I don't know. It seemed to be gold. I don't know. Anyway, that's number two. So you got the mobile processor chip. You've got the screen. Let's talk about the third most important component. And this is important for every single phone. This is important for every single product in the world. Memory. Now, if you look at there are only three major memory manufacturers in the world: Micron, SK Hynix, and Samsung. Now, SK Hynix and Samsung, they got the technology through some kind of osmosis. I don't know exactly how they got it, but they're big companies, Chaebos in South Korea. But Micron is actually at least 1,000 patterns on NAND and flash and DRAM memory. So it is the undisputed leader, and Apple uses Micron memory. Now, they had a little infringement case in Taiwan the past decade or so, where Taiwanese management working previously in Micron jumped ship to UMC in Taiwan, and they took technology, and their whole goal was to bring it to China, and they did that, and then they caused huge geopolitical issues. So I will defend Taiwan in saying that most Taiwanese manufacturers are very smart. They realize that I can make more money by making things for others. And that's Foxconn is a perfect example. MediaTek is actually a perfect example. People don't realize that the Google Pixel phone emerged in a lab in HTC, and Google eventually bought it and turned it into the Pixel phone. MTK, MediaTek. I mentioned HTC, which is Taiwan's company. Let's talk about MediaTek. MediaTek has been making chips pretty much in the background, supplying to everybody. And of course, Foxconn, but this is Pegatron. That's why I say to people, read above the trees, take a bird's eye view of all this. It really is Taiwan technology that has driven the entire ICT sector. And it has been for at least 20 years that the West knows about. For me, it's more like 35 years because I started my career in the golden age of Taiwan microcomputer manufacturing industry. I rode it up from the computer industry, I rode it up to the land mobile, and then the smartphone industry, and now into all these other sectors. So we have to put a bunch of these things in perspective. And China is also a smart company. They know that Taiwan is the goose that laid the golden egg. They know that. They know that.
So we have already touched the base with smartphones. Coming to the Gen 2 of AI smartphones and the next wave. We are hearing a lot about the GenAI smartphone revolution. How real is it today, and what's hype versus reality?
There's also a geopolitical issue, but to call a Huawei smartphone hype is incredibly misleading. It is a well-designed phone. Xiaomi makes very good phones. And then you've got Vivo, Oppo, and OnePlus. Vivo, Oppo, OnePlus. I don't know, crowd, do you realize those are actually all the same company, BBK in Shenzhen? Oh, same company, same management, same company. People don't realize that, but it got its birth in life in 2008-9. I visited all these companies. They were what we called in Mandarin, we called them Shanzhai. This is a very important topic where all of these companies came out of Huaqiangbei in Shenzhen, which is the electronics district of Shenzhen. It's an enormous place. But all of these companies started as small startups, and they got components and they assembled them. They didn't have licenses for like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. They just got the chips, illegally made them. Then they got what we in America we have this advertisement, get milk. They're trying to promote the milk industry in America. And then Nike says, just do it. Well, this is what they did in China. Here's what they did. MediaTek's chips in the early 2000s, 2009, 8, 9, 10, MediaTek had this very, very low-cost manufacturing process that eliminated 1 year to actually manufacture a new smartphone, or iPhone, at that time, just feature phone, not smartphone yet. They would basically use MediaTek's chip, but then the operating system was terrible. I mean, really terrible. In many situations, it wasn't even in English. It was in Chinese because they were focusing on what we now call the global south, in which case China, and then they would have simple English. The operating system was terrible. But then Google, around 2008, 9, Google got milk. Google just did it. Google said, wait a minute, there's this place called China, and they're starting to make these feature phones. They don't care about what legality or not, but they're buying the chips from MTK in Taiwan, and the operating system was terrible, but they're manufacturing in Huaqiangbei and these various factories in southern China, also some in Beijing. So what happened is when Google operating system started to be used, now they started to compete with the likes of Nokia, Samsung, Palm, remember them? And BlackBerry, Palm, BlackBerry, Nokia, Samsung, and I'm sure there's one important one that I'm missing, Motorola. And what happened is, in 2009, I gave a presentation called The Rise of the Shanzhai, and all of these Western smartphone manufacturers were in the room. I was invited by the American Chamber of Commerce in Beijing to give this presentation, and it was groundbreaking. My management was so amazed that I did all this research. I did it because my job was to promote mobile payments and security, and I just found out about this whole Shanzhai phenomenon. And then I got interviewed by Newsweek, by CNN, by all these companies. Nobody had ever heard of this concept. Anyway, it's called Shanzhai. I gave the presentation. I said, all of these Western companies are going to be dead in China. You could hear a pin drop. You could feel the faces of the executives turn from where, us Caucasian people were kind of pale faces. You could see the faces turning red and almost look like Mutiny on the Bounty. Remember that very old movie where they send the captain off the plank into the shark-infested ocean? I felt like that was going to happen to me, but I stuck to my guns and I said, what's happening is this. In Shenzhen, they're using HTC's processor chip, and just-in-time manufacturing procedures, and they're using Google's operating system, and they're putting the fake Nokia, Motorola, Samsung name on the phones, and they're shipping them all over China and also the global south, where there's lack of governmental restrictions for the importation of these Shanzhai phones. And I gave that presentation in late 2009. By 2011, they were almost all gone, and it was terrible. But my presentation is on YouTube. Go back and look at it. Yeah, now let's get to the GenAI smartphone situation. So Huawei manufactures and uses SMIC for the manufacturing process. HiSilicon, which is their design house. I visited HiSilicon many times. So their design house is HiSilicon. They actually design the AI solution. And from there, they basically farm out to SMIC for the manufacturer. Huawei also has its Harmony operating system. The rumor is, well, we're all a socialist country. What country? Huawei, why don't you share this with Xiaomi? No way, Jose. No way. Huawei is not going to share the Harmony OS, and it's not going to share its chips with the other manufacturers. You got to look at the situation. When I was pushing the concept of Shanzhai, there were hundreds of manufacturers of smartphones, of chip vendors. There were hundreds and hundreds. And look at EVs, the same thing, hundreds and hundreds. It's consolidation. It will continue to occur, this consolidation, and you're just going to have a few brands. And that is really globalization. That's capitalism and globalization to its finest. So you're going to see no more than 5 Chinese companies making smartphones. That's already the situation right now because the others just can't survive. And Huawei is a very, I visited Huawei, got to be 50 times, maybe more than 50 times over the past 20 years. Got to be more than 50 times. In all of their offices, they have offices all over China. And the same, I visited Xiaomi many, many times, and all these other guys, these companies as well. So getting back to the AI situation, they all need to embed AI. Now, of course, they're all looking at ChatGPT. But let's migrate to the other vendors. You got Pixel Phone. Obviously, Google is using its own AI algorithms on its Pixel Phone, which makes perfect sense. You've got Apple. Apple is using Apple Intelligence. What's the problem there? Chinese government won't allow Apple Intelligence because it uses ChatGPT. They won't allow that in China. And so Apple had to partner with Alibaba for their QN operating system for their AI algorithms to be embedded in Apple Intelligence. That is elite capture, if you ask me. That is not very smart, but I think Apple is in a tough situation. And that's one of the geopolitical reasons why they really are reshoring. No matter what anybody says, they are reshoring. It's a fact. So now let's look at some of the other vendors. You've got Samsung. Samsung has its own AI solution as well. And Samsung has 2 phones with AI. So what you have is a combination of Chinese, South Korean. The Taiwanese don't really make.
So basically what you are saying, there's 3 directions, the Chinese, Korean, and the American ones, right?
Yes. And you're not going to see, there's a possibility, in my humble opinion, there's a possibility that Vietnam will create its own national Viet phone, its own, Vietnamese branded phone. There's that absolute possibility because Americans are transferring semiconductor chip production to Vietnam as well. At least, Intel's had a plant there for more than a decade. And also, I think it might make its own smartphone. There's a Chinese company in Africa, Transsion, making feature smartphones now. My anticipation is that the African continent, people are hungry to develop things themselves, and everybody is playing the China plus one strategy. Come, manufacture, I want to learn. It is kind of a bifurcation between the East and the West. Fact of the matter is, Taiwan doesn't have any bifurcation because Taiwan doesn't care to put its name on all the great technology it has. You want to manufacture, they have it all. They'll go where it makes not political sense, where it makes economic sense. So you've got to take the bird's eye view of what's really going on. The world wants semiconductors. The world wants to make smartphones. It's that many countries, but it is going to happen, and it is globalization, and it is happening. Stable. It's mobile, and that's why it's global. Global mobilization means it's not going to stay in one country. It left America 20 plus years ago, but now it's returning, and it can return.
Karl, I would be really interested to hear your opinion on the American situation.
It's not opinion, it's research. I'm in possession of lots of knowledge about what's going on because I'm in the industry. So I gave that presentation in 2015, how Western people did not want to be handcuffed or blackmailed into all these requirements and regulations when they go into a country to manufacture. They basically said, we're not going to put up with this very much longer in China. And they didn't. They started to figure out a supply chain shift to Southeast Asia and India. But now you've got issues with India. The issue with India is also, as I mentioned before, a lot of tariffs. The issue of tariffs. Vietnam doesn't have that problem, but Vietnam only has 100 million people, and that's not enough to make 100 million iPhones a day. So in Vietnam, India is ramping up, but they can only make 20% of the production. 80% is still coming for China. China can continue, though, that although China is not a cheap place anymore, and China has to contend with labor problems, with an incredibly intelligent workforce of new graduates in STEM business, STEM degrees. They want to work. My suggestion is go to where the opportunities are, and they're going through all of Southeast Asia, and Chinese engineering and Taiwanese engineering talent is a premium. You want to talk about premiums? I think Mark Zuckerberg will pay millions of dollars for an AI engineer. If I were an AI engineer, I would not be sticking around China. I would be going to Silicon Valley. That's just my humble opinion. If I were an AI engineer, and I'm not, who wants my services? I'll go wherever you want it. And so that's kind of the situation. But the Trump administration has said, as a country, we cannot be strong unless we have certain industries reshored. But reshoring sun-dried industries makes no sense for the United States. It actually makes no sense for China. China's moving up using robotics and high-speed manufacturing capabilities with robotics and humans. America has to do, and they are doing the same thing in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, New York, and other places, Ohio in particular, and even the Rust Belt in Detroit. Because America realizes that, the Trump administration realizes that, and they figured out a way to do it. And what the people don't realize is the way they figured out to do that was to work what we call the maquiladora. I'm sorry, my Spanish is not very good, but my Mandarin is fluent. So this maquiladora is where Foxconn and Pegatron and some of these other ODMs and contract manufacturers have been bringing their design capabilities and their contract manufacturing capabilities along the border. Now, there's a strategic reason why the U.S. signed this new previous NAFTA trade agreement, now called USMCA. They're going to manufacture along the border, and Americans, Canadians, and Mexican nationals will be able to work freely along that border area in duty-free, tax-free factories, which will be highly regulated, very safe, very secure, and, good time to have an American passport, a Canadian passport, or a Mexican passport. This is being done right now under the radar, being done right now. If you look at the design process, look at TSMC. It's very obvious if you look at TSMC, but then, as I said, look at Micron, look at Corning, look at Foxconn's and the other contract manufacturers, and then the design ODMs. America doesn't have ODMs, but China has lots of ODMs. Taiwan has the most famous ODMs, and other places have ODMs as well. They will relocate to the border area because labor is cheap in the border because Mexican labor is cheaper than Chinese labor. Indian labor is probably cheaper than Mexican labor, but when you can't, it is a subtle process of bringing the technology back to reshoring it to the United States. It's a subtle process. Apple does not want to bring attention. That's why 80% is still China, 20% India, and then other peripherals in Vietnam, and then other places. They don't want to bring attention to the world to what they're doing, but you think about it, elite capture when you can't use your AI algorithm inside China. It's a problem. But now look at India with the iPhone. There's also a problem in India. WeChat, which is a super app. Now, what WeChat did, Transsion, what Tencent did is they saw WhatsApp and they said, hey, this is cool. I'm going to create something similar, but I'm going to be better than WhatsApp. I'm going to make this a super nationwide app, and that's what they've done. But it's banned in India. You cannot use WeChat in India. So you see the bifurcation happening even in India. You see the problem of techno-nationalism, of protectionism, and of one country and another country. In America, we're guilty of this with TikTok as well. You see the whole problem here, and I look at it as very, very simple. There is no trust online, and there's no trust between countries. And so I don't want to get into that topic because that's a whole different discussion, but it comes back to the fact that countries want to own their IP. They want to become national champions. China has done it. Taiwan has done it. Japan has done it. South Korea has done it. Even Singapore, believe it or not, little Singapore. Remember Creative Labs? Remember that? Remember Creative Labs in Singapore? They did it too. And it's happening in Malaysia. It's happening in Tata. Look at Tata. So my call to action for Americans is study what's going on in Asia for the supply chain. My call to Europeans is you better study what the Chinese are doing with electric vehicles, because you are a great region of the world, but you forgot how to manufacture because, like America, you got greedy and you outsourced the crown's jewels to China and to other places when you should be investing in your labor force. I say that to any European who's listening to this, and I say that to any North American who's listening to this. The Global South, their viewpoint is give me all this stuff. I'll make it for you. But the United States realizes if we don't manufacture anything, how can we make airplanes? How can we make drones? How can we make anything if we don't make the basic semiconductor chip? How can we make breakthroughs in medicine if we don't have the manufacturing in North America? America did it. Canada did it. Europeans did it. Hello, Houston. Well, where's Houston? This is my mouse, but let's say it's my iPhone. Houston, we really have a problem here because we've outsourced the crown's jewels, as the British would say. We've outsourced the crown's jewels. Bloody damn wrong. Let's do something about it. So,
Karl, if you would have to leave our listeners with one insight about the future of AI chip smartphone, what would it be? Where shall we look at, and what are the insights for future?
Look at what's going on in Asia. Look at what's going on in Greater China, because it really, between Taiwan and China, these two places, maybe South Korea as well and Japan, but really is Greater China. They are driving the future of robotics, drones, electric vehicles, and semiconductor manufacturing, China included. If you're going to develop technology, you have to figure out where you're going to sell it. That's Greater China to sell it to. If you're a manufacturer, Newport Technologies can help you because I have the relationships with all of these manufacturers between Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, Singapore, India, Indonesia, Malaysia. I have spent more than 3 decades living and working in all of these countries for decades, and I have the language skills. I don't just speak Mandarin, I speak also Hokkien, which is the southern dialect where southern Chinese all over Southeast Asia speak this dialect. And I also speak a little bit of Malay. This is my life that I've dedicated this. Western people, don't just look to the West. You have to look to the East. You have to realize also that you're behind the 8 ball if you're starting now, but you have to realize that the talent is in Asia, especially for the AI chip designs. That's 50% of it comes from North and Southeast Asia, which means China and India. That's why FANG companies in North America bring the talent to America to take advantage of it. And also, AI is in your future. AI will be used for all kinds of very cool things on your smartphone. But I also say, be aware of AI because they will use data to pry into your privacy. AI is just a tool. It's a software tool and it's a machine. It's really who is behind the AI that you need to be concerned about. And we have data brokers stealing your data all day long. So I say AI on your, absolutely, because AI on your smartphone, if you give it too many permissions, it will ultimately take over everything that you do and it will be creepy. So you have to monitor the AI and you have to make sure that the operating system has a way to toggle certain things on and off. I mean, because otherwise AI is going to wake you up in the morning with Bach or Beethoven or rock music, and it's going to completely take over your life. I say we do not want machines to completely take over our life. I'm Christian. I don't believe that a machine is a species. I believe a machine is just a combination of software and hardware. It's really the biases, the prejudices, and stereotypes of who use it that cause the destructiveness of AI. Like, for example, deep fakes. It's really the destructiveness of people with greed who take simple productivity tools with AI and try to invade your privacy. So don't do that. Look to Asia for the AI. Look to America. Look to Europe. Look to Asia. It is a combined ecosystem AI. We need to figure out a way to make it very cost effective. And also, we have to figure out a way to have enough water and power to run these data centers, which run the AI. This is the reason why semiconductor manufacturing will not occur in too many places in the world because they don't have the power and they don't have the water, and they never will. India and China, the two largest populations in the world, they have water issues. India has power issues. China has been able to manage the power issues much better than many other countries. In America, we have water and power issues, but I say TSMC has a plan for all of this. It's a very smart company. It's a very, very smart company.
Thank you. Thank you, Karl. Thank you so much for joining me today in Chips Weekly. Your insight into the AI chip supply chain, GenAI smartphones, and the Pacific century gave us a powerful look at how East and West are shaping the future together. For our listeners who want to learn more about Karl's work, you can visit his company, Newport Technologies, at newporttechnologies.com. I will also include the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thank you again for tuning in, and until the next time.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Diana. Have a great day.